and we give the minister, say, another 5 minutes. He is on his way. Thank you. Sure. Tea. That's why I said tea. I didn't say meat.
And I'm going to tell Aaron what you said, Mama. That's all you're interested in. Deputy Minister.
Honorable members, shall we settle down so that we can start? Shall we start? I am reliably informed that you all have a copy of the agenda that we will be using for this meeting. In terms of the agenda, we are on item number 1, which is opening and welcome. I would like us to bow our heads and observe a moment of silence for prayer and stroke or meditation. Thank you. Sure, want me to say that? All right, honorable members, let me take this opportunity to greet the honorable members, the hardworking staff, support staff, delegation from the PBO, delegation from the FFC, and all our esteemed guests. Thank you very much for attending and showing interest in our work. A special word of welcome is extended to the Honorable Minister of Finance, the DG, and the entire team. Okay, I've said Minister of Finance, yes. I nearly forgot the Deputy Minister of Finance.
He doesn't like you.
The underlying message is that, indeed, I respect all of you. Thank you very much. All right, Honourable Minister, thank you for gracing us with your presence. There is a value add, and even in future, I'm sure we're going to enjoy your presence and your value add in our meetings. Thank you very much. We know you've got a very tight schedule, but I mean, availing yourself for this work will help us big times. The main objective of the meeting is to receive a first briefing by the Minister on the 2019 budget. This briefing will sharpen our understanding, give us deeper insight on the budget, and it will also, moving forward, help us engage from an informed position when we process and report on the proposed fiscal framework and the 2019 Division of Revenue Bill. I'm sure by now you've had a lot of comments, opinions about the budget. I've just decided to pick on the FNB's opinion. The FNB in its unpacking of the national budget says the minister walked a tight rope but delivered a balanced 2019 budget. So let's listen carefully to the okay, after this, all right. Let's listen carefully to the briefing. And I can assure you I'm looking forward to a meaningful and a constructive engagement with this presentation through brief and short questions and comments so that we can, get out on time for the sitting that is scheduled for 2 o'clock. Thank you very much. This meeting is co-chaired by the 3 chairpersons from finance and then standing.
There's a 4. This one is 2.
Okay. And the 2 in 1 from NCOP. But my colleague would like to say something.
Thank you, Co-Chair Posa and Honourable Minister, Deputy Minister, Honourable Members. We have also our chairpersons of the portfolio committees on finance in the provincial legislatures that are here today at this briefing, Honourable Minister, and they will again join us when we do the briefing on the Division of Revenue Bill. And that's engagement that flows every year to tighten the relationship between Parliament and our provincial legislators. To the committee secretariat of the 4 committees, please note the apologies that it appears in the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. My other co-chair.
Just a process matter. To remind members, we have 4 committees here, and we have to finish at 15:00. So the norm is that in the first round, people get up to 3 minutes to speak. But if you're over 60, the time is unlimited. So Thandi, please note, you don't qualify.
This for a discussion. No. Shall we then leave it at that? Thank you very much for your understanding. Shall we then move on to item number 2, which is apologies?
I've got the apology of Honorable Abraham Sintanti, so her daughter is getting married tomorrow.
Thank you. Any other apology?
For Finance and Appropriations Select Committee in the NCOP, Honourable Motara and Honourable Monakedi.
Thank you. Over to you, Honourable Member.
Yeah, for Deputy Chair of EFF, Deputy President of EFF, Floyd Shivambo.
Okay, Honourable Member Floyd Shivambo, thank you. Any other apology? Honourable members, do you accept the apologies?
No discussion.
No, listen, it is a procedural matter. Ne? Do you accept the apologies?
Yes.
Any proposal for acceptance? And then any seconder? Seconded. Thank you very much. Shall we then proceed to item number 3, which is presentation by the Minister of Finance? Honourable Minister, I would now like to hand over to your good self. Thanks.
Thank you very much, co-chairs. There's a ho-ho in my throat and nostrils. I hope it was not said by Floyd, and then after which he disappeared from here. But that is going to force me to be very brief. The DG and his colleagues will take you through the detail of the budget, the allocations and the division of revenue and so on. But I thought that I should just step a little bit backwards and try and present the background to the budget. And something which I think I'm finding very difficult to communicate to to people is that there's no endless supply of cash out there. National Treasury does not have a printing press. So we have to start from the beginning, saying that based on the experience we've had, say, for the past 3 years, for example, we have an idea where we should start in building the budget. Basic idea, but it means we have to check carefully what's happening to economic growth, which gives us an impression about what we can project as the revenue that we might collect in year or the outer years. So there has to be revenue. That's how we set the revenue targets for SARS. And then we have to allocate to the expenditure items. And we have an idea about where that should be going. And then, as is usually the case, the demands for expenditure far outweigh the revenue. And we end up with this deficit before borrowing, which has to be financed obviously by borrowing in the market, which in the process naturally piles up into our debt portfolio. And with interest every year on the debt, there comes a huge interest bill on the debt. So what I think I find surprising is that no matter how many times one explains the constraints that we face from the income side, i.e. revenue, the demands on the expenditure side don't moderate. And government is a very strange institution. So they keep on doing the same things, they just escalate. So population is growing. So some of the expenditure items on grants increase, pressure on hospitals and schools. So even when the economy is not growing strongly, the pressure on social services keeps coming. So the background, therefore, is that poor economic performance, increased demands on the expenditure side, poor outcomes on the income side, an increasing number of people who are now submitting requests for VAT refunds. Now that we started again giving people refunds on the VAT, there's now an increased number of people, it seems, who are submitting for refunds. They've regained the hope which they'd given up. So, Chairs, the DG and his staff will indicate some of the detail. But our biggest risks to our fiscal stance or fiscal framework is the state-owned enterprises and the public sector wage bill. I'm assuming that the rest we know, don't have to waste our time about the wastage which normally takes place. We know about that. It just needs to be dealt with. So SAA, DINEL, Eskom, are really the large ones. Then SABC is significant but not that large because they are requesting 6.8 billion, which we'll have to think about. So yesterday I was at pains with my poor English to try and explain that anybody or any state-owned enterprise which approaches us for financial support, they must know that by definition, we're going to appoint somebody to be in their offices. In the private sector, it's called a chief restructuring officer, but the lawyers said we can't use that word. So we came up with something called chief reconfiguring officer. It's the same thing. And we explained the logic that in the same way as when a bank is in trouble, the governor of the bank will put that bank under curatorship. We're going to be very strict now because we want our resources to be properly looked after. And we indicated that Eskom is going to receive 23 billion rand every year for the next couple of years. In the 3 years, something like 69 billion rand. I'm sorry about the ho-ho in the system. We have to provide that support, but we also want to see concrete measures in the restructuring process of Eskom. Generation, transmission, and distribution. And in the process, as I said, we'll probably see more competition on the generation side in particular, which might benefit consumers. And we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The last thing that I want to draw your attention to before I hand over to the DG is a graph on our debt profile, which is on page 12. You see, at the time of the the 2018-19 budget, the debt to GDP ratio was somewhere, was that, DJ? What is it? 55.8%. But of interest, I wanted us to see the almost straight figure from 2015-16 through to 2018-19. was a steep increase in that figure. That's of serious concern. And the projections going forward now indicate that there's been an upward revision for the forecast years. Of course, of concern is when the debt to GDP ratio reaches about 60% in 22-23. That's when we will start hearing economists making a lot of noise about the dangers of a debt trap. And some people in other parts of the world beginning to make lots of noise about our inability to manage our finances. And they might gracefully want to come and assist. And we don't want them to come and assist, really. But they might. So I want us to pay particular attention to this development going forward and help us to manage the debt to GDP ratio down, hopefully back to less than 40%. I think that's what I can say now. If there will be a need to make any additions, I can do so during the course of the presentation. Thank you. Can I hand over to the DG and with your approval?
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Over to the DG.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, honorable members. Good afternoon, chairs. Thank you. Maybe let me start by thanking, it's not always usual that we have 4 committees, so we are honored to be sitting with 4 committees on a day like this. Thank you very much. I'm not alone. I'm with the colleagues, both from SARS and senior colleagues from the Treasury. All the divisions are represented, so we should be able to take care of all questions, if any. If we go to slide number 2, basically I think this summarizes what we are saying, what the Minister emphasized yesterday and what the Minister is saying today, that this budget that you presented really puts us in a new trajectory. And we also identifies the long-term risks, and we're also saying in a way that the risks that we've been identifying over the years, in particular, risk associated with Eskom, has materialized, and that we are doing something about it. It also confirms that we presented this budget in a very, very difficult environment. Growth remains weak. Public debt, as Minister has indicated, accelerated, and there are obviously governance and operational concerns that have manifested itself in the whole of the public sector. And the message that we're coming with is that we are doing something about them. Through this budget, we want to narrow the deficit and stabilize the debt, as Minister said. We are also supporting the restructuring of the electricity sector and reduce risks that Eskom poses to the economy. And we are not burying our heads in sand. In this budget, we are saying it's important that we strengthen private sector investments, whereby we want to improve planning and implementation of infrastructure and building state institutions. So that's, in a way, the summary of the budget. It's tight. We are doing something about it finally. And as we are doing that, we have to obviously take care of our debt situation and make sure that it stabilizes. As Minister indicated, that our wish is that it's at somewhere below 40% as we move on. Slide 3, what we're basically doing there is, again, the book, the budget review that we presented yesterday takes into account the environment that we are in. Global growth has slowed down. So, in a way, we took interest in what's happening globally as it impacts on us. Slide number 4, we have revised growth downwards from the 2018 MTBPS. And there we are presenting the numbers. Real growth is estimated at 1.5% from 1.7. CPI inflation is projected at 5.2 in 2019. And the projections remain unchanged in the 2018 estimates as presented in the MTBPS. One of the key important things that there is progress in restoring confidence, supporting growth. As I said, there are some growth enhancing reforms that we've identified, and we are pleased in this budget, and you will remember that some of these came from the plan to restore the economy and to stimulate the economy that the President presented to us last year. So there is progress, and we are also spending a little bit of time in the book talking about that. If you go deeper into the budget, unlike the headline numbers that you see, you will see that we have reprioritized support for black farmers, black commercial farmers in particular. We are putting efforts to revitalize townships and industrial parks and building, as I said in the earlier slide, that we are building institutions that have been destroyed. In this case, we're saying we are rebuilding the South African Revenue Services. And Mark is here, he can get into details if need be as to what exactly they are doing and what they've been doing. And the efforts, and some of them are identified in the book. We have reprioritized funding to ensuring that we advance the urgent matters that have been identified in health and education by filling critical posts and completing some infrastructure projects in schools, in particular sanitation projects. There are some critical areas of intervention that will improve public infrastructure. We are giving life and effect to what we started 2 years ago. When we were in Faji, we came to you with a budget facility for infrastructure. We were not clear what we were doing, but now we can see a light at the end of the tunnel to a point that we are incredibly, we can put a credible picture as to what we are doing on the infrastructure fund. And you'll see in the documentation somewhere that we are putting a fund together, and we are in the initial stages putting in 100 billion rand over a 10-year period in really ensuring that we take infrastructure spending to a different level. And as I said, we are reforming, we are contributing, this budget is contributing, we are not bailing out Eskom, we are contributing to ensuring that Eskom operates at a different level. So in making sure that we restructure the electricity sector, we recognize that Eskom is too big to fail. We cannot just sit back and look the other way, but I think this budget really identifies that if it's not financially sustainable, then it obviously impacts on our growth moving forward, and it may just bring us down as a country. And Minister obviously did give some highlights earlier. We are putting 23 billion rand for the next 3 years. This is what this is the number, 69 billion over 3 years. But the quantum of which is almost 230 billion over a 10-year period. It's not, as I said, going to be money. We are going to put strict conditions that will enable, essentially, for Eskom to do two things: service its debts, and ensure that it's able to repay or embark on its capital program. Further steps will be taken, and they'll be announced in the months ahead to restructure the electricity sector. You, honorable members, may be aware that the President has established a task team that was essentially ensuring that it looks into Eskom, and recommendations have been made. The report is with the President. We have been interacting with Eskom. We have been interacting with the task team, and we work closely with the Department of Public Enterprises to really understand what you're doing. As I said, focus on the infrastructure fund. The BFI is up and going. We gave the DBSA some 625 million, and we're saying they have to ensure that we set ourselves on a proper trajectory to deliver on this mandate. Together with GTEC and the Presidential Infrastructure Commission, will actually use this money for project preparation and implementation. Local government infrastructure grants are being changed to increase flexibility and incentivize private financing. I think as you engage in the division of revenue bills in the next few weeks to come, this will come out very clear, and our team, Madijeng and Wendy and the team, will be here to really get into the details of what that means. 7 priority programs worth about 33 billion underway in the metros will generate mixed use, mixed income living environments, attracting substantial contributions from the private sector over a long term. We'll design a blended financing infrastructure fund, 100 billion as I said. We are able to leverage other key opportunities that may be there where the private sector, DFIs, multilateral development banks can come into the picture to actually grow that 100 billion rand into anything much, much bigger than that in order for us, because the infrastructure needs are there. We need to make interventions in rural roads. We need to make interventions in improving water and sanitation and water infrastructure in especially rural areas. And this is one directive that I think we are operating under, where clearly rural roads and water infrastructure is key, and many other infrastructure priorities and needs. On the revenue fund, we are coming up with tax measures amounting to 15 billion in 1920 and 10 billion in 2021. And again, we've got a smaller Momoniat who's here. Chris is here, obviously, and apologies, Momo has been deployed somewhere else for today, but Chris is around with us. We've done some expenditure reprioritization. There's baseline deductions of 50 billion rand. And we are making real interventions in this area. Provinces over time have been reducing numbers in terms of, wage bill numbers have been growing down, and headcounts have been growing down. So there is a narrative that we also have to clarify that says, we are not going to go out and be cutting jobs and these are the numbers as reflected, that they are going down. The assumptions that we made previously was that there's going to be high take-up, but the reality is that here's an opportunity where you can revise down some of the personnel allocations, and therefore we see the reduction. So we've revised down amounts relating to infrastructure, to compensation. At the same time, we are doing some restructuring. We are giving Eskom, as I said, the 69 billion rand. We are putting money aside, 100 billion over a longer period, but at least in the medium term, 5 billion. And again, we are putting some small amount there to 2021 census. And we hope, the State South Africa obviously will use that money. Again, the minister mentioned 3 particular state-owned companies. SAA, Denel, SABC. We didn't outright just put money again and say, so much will go to this. We want, in the contingency reserve, we have made provision for some of these state-owned companies to be, but the financial support, as you've said, will obviously come with conditions. One condition, ministers already outlined, that in some cases in fact, in most cases, we should put a chief reconfiguration officer. If we're putting money, we cannot look the other way. Someone who will be our eyes and ears as a shareholder in these state-owned companies to ensure that money is well spent. Slide number 9, tax proposals. Again, we can see what adjustments we have made there around general fuel levy adjustments in the indirect taxes, introduction of carbon tax that Parliament passed on about a day or two ago, and some, a billion rand from some of the excise duties. Now, slide number 10 is quite, a summary of what I've been saying. If you look at the adjustments that are made to the main budget, non-interest spending since 2018 budget, and the reprioritization that we did, you'll remember that during the MTBPS, and we were battered for that, we did not make any changes. All we did was to reprioritize towards spending. And so basically, that's what we're taking into account the plan that the president articulated on recovering, stimulating the economy. There are changes that I've just noted that there are baseline reductions of 50 billion and addition to spending of 75 billion. And as a result, if you look at it, we essentially have increased our spending ceiling by almost 16 billion over the 3 years, if you do minus and additions there. Slide number 11, changes to expenditure ceiling. Again, this slide basically depicts what's happening. The expenditure ceiling also excludes the provision that is there in the state-owned company financing funding in 1920. and we're saying it should and it will, let me underline, it will be raised from sale of non-core assets. We have been working closely with the Department of Public Enterprises. The two ministers engaged. There's a list that we are working on, and all that's left is to finalize and finalize the process that will really unlock value and potential that are in some of these non-core assets that we are identifying. And at the appropriate time, obviously, we'll come back to this committee and inform the committee in detail of what exactly is included in those non-core assets. Now, I'm not going to go on again to slide 12. Minister went into detail. I must just hasten to say we've got a slide, we're not putting it up and it's nowhere in the book, but for the purpose of the conversation, maybe let me mention it. If we have to subtract Eskom support, then the story that we've painted 2 years ago to this committee makes sense, whereby we said debt will stabilize, albeit at a higher number, but around the 50 plus. And if you have to strip the support that we're giving to Eskom now and look at a different metrics that shows the primary balance and the budget balance, you will see that our fiscal consolidation story has started to bear fruit. It's just unfortunate that one of the risks that we've identified, which is Eskom, and the risk that poses Eskom, puts us in that black line, sorry, in the red line. So I just thought, let me mention that and prove that without Eskom and without some measure, our fiscal consolidation was credible. Consolidated framework in slide number 13. Budget balance 4.5, minus 4.5 in 1920, reducing to about 4%. And the consolidated budget as depicted here includes the main budget framework and spending by provinces, social security funds, and public entities financed from own revenue sources. And over the MTF, consolidated non-interest spending will grow at an annual real average rate of 2%. So despite all of these challenges, there is real increases that we see in these budgets. Managing public service wage bill. We said in the statement the Minister presented this yesterday, we have been in discussion with the Department of Public Service Administration. The two ministers and I have been engaged with the department, whereby meaningful interventions will be made around making sure that the wage bill is manageable moving forward. Some of these things it's just a matter of implementation, but the law or the regulatory processes that we agreed upon is there. For instance, early retirement, we have engaged GPF, whereby we're targeting 16 to 30,000 employees over the next 3 years to really ensure that those who want to, or those who will raise their, no one will be forced to leave. Those who want to raise their hands and say, we are ready for early retirement, the ages between 54 and 59, we want to go. Again, we know how many people there are in the system. There's about 130,000 in the whole of the public service, including provinces. All we wish is that they must just avail themselves, and we'll be more than happy to engage without penalty, and they can gracefully exit the system with honor and dignity. And that's what we want to do. Slide number 15, debt service cost remains the highest cost, fastest growing allocation. Followed by community development, learning and culture, and peace and security as the lowest growing category of spending at 4.6. Now, learning and culture remains the largest function. If we have to break this in functions, it remains the largest function. Learning and culture, 1.2 billion of 1.8 billion goes to this area. So again, you can see the numbers there. I'm not going to read them all out to members. Division of revenue. Provinces average out at 43%, rising to 43.1% as a percentage of nationally raised revenues. And local government increases from 8.9 in 1920 to 9.2 in 2021-22. In terms of financial position of state-owned companies, slide number 18. Several entities are struggling, as I said, to meet their debt obligations, with return on equity deteriorating to minus 0.3% in 17-18, and this reflects weak revenue growth and high cost structures. And the growing debt service cost is also a worry, as we indicated, that is one of the fastest growing category of spending. And over the year ahead, we will obviously initiate reform that strengthen the governance of these state-owned companies, including look at the financial management and operations of these companies. It will be irresponsible of us not to identify risks that are there in any environment. We've always had this area to focus on, that there are risks to the fiscal framework as presented and the economic outlook. They remain elevated. State-owned company reform process, it has to happen. We have to reform those state-owned companies, including domestic economic outlook. If we continue to have load shedding, we'll have issues. If the prolonged mining, industrial action in mines, adverse weather conditions that make it difficult for economic activity to prosper. If there are any challenges on the economic front, international economic front, if China and the US are growing slowly, that obviously impacts trade frictions, or you can call trade wars, essentially between the US and China, and can become a factor that, the issues in Brexit and the whole Brexit debates and the terms that are there, and obviously potential banking sector risks that may be available out there in other continents. Tax buoyancy and SARS reorganization process. We think, by there are certain interventions, and again we can go into detail if the committee so wishes, that if we have to make these interventions, and Minister of Finance mentioned yesterday in the speech that SARS took some certain actions, and you must have read about them, whereby addressing illicit tobacco industry is being addressed, is being engaged with. So there are benefits that obviously will come with SARS flexing its muscles to an extent that you are able to recoup or recover what's essentially. Minister summed it up in the House yesterday. He says, pay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. And I think this we see, and that in essentially saying SARS is going to strengthen its hand, and as we are busy making sure that it functions effectively so. In conclusion, Chair, the environment remains a challenge. Issues in tax administration have resulted in revenue shortfalls, and we are doing something about it. The 2019 budget priorities, narrowing the budget deficit and stabilizing national debt, albeit at a high level. We are restructuring the electricity sector. We are reducing the risks that are immediate that are posed by Eskom. We are also reprioritizing spending and making sure that we are coming up with initiatives and projects that will put us on a different growth trajectory. In particular, I'm talking about the infrastructure-related interventions, whilst ensuring that the growth-enhancing reforms are enhanced in a way that we can really look back and say we have done good as a country. And again, addressing the state capacity to implement policy. We need to strengthen this. Implementation. And Minister can add, we had a very successful conversation in 2 colloquia that we had in December and January with economists, both local and international. And we are directed at the right levels, right? Right signals were given to us by these economists who clearly indicated that implementation is an issue, and also ensure that we have to leverage on what we have. And if we don't have certain particular skills, we should be able to get the skills from somewhere else. Significant risk, finally, Chair, remains, are there, and they remain both in terms of the economic and fiscal projections that we put forward before you. And with that, Chair, we'll be able to engage, and thank you very much.
Just excuse our co-chair. A call of nature she had to respond to. So, colleagues, all of us, including the chairs, will stick to the 3-minute rule, but we'll have a second round, okay? Yes, my friend? I'll give you numbers, right? 1, 2, Gwabaza, 3, Imam, and then look in the order, Gwen, 4, okay, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, there you are. For the first round, shall we take the 11? That's 33 minutes, eh? 33 minutes, yeah. Good. So we're timing you from the phone, okay? And you can time yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. My name is Khotso from the Free State Legislature. Two questions that I just want to pose to the National Treasury Chair. The State of the Nation address, when President was actually talking there, he spoke about the unbundling. Yesterday, when the Minister was actually dealing with the issue, we thought that we'll actually get a proper understanding, taking from the State of the Nation that the Minister of Finance, as and when he's going to table the budget, will then be able to explain in detail what does this mean. Now, seated here, we hear almost three words: reconfiguration, unbundling, restructuring, which is quite actually confusing because we don't actually understand what do they mean about unbundling. And as we know now, that a number of concerns have been raised with regard to, particularly from the point of view of the economic freedom fighters, to say that what does unbundling or reconfiguration or restructuring mean, so that we can be able to understand as and when maybe times goes on, maybe the interventions that we are making with regard to Eskom. As things stands, we only hear about the risk and all of that, and the DG, I thought that will go into detail to tell us what does all these three words mean, so that we begin to understand clearly what is it that you mean about the unbundling. The second question is about the public sector issue, which says that voluntarily retirement. I want to put it in that way, Chair. Now, I'm trying to check, because you are going to drain out what we call a human resource capacity, because I understand that some of the people that, as and when they're going to do so, they may have possessed what we call the institutional memory, which may actually somehow affect the capacity of the state to do certain things, if that's what we're looking at. What are the plans that are there to ensure that, as and when you're looking at the numbers that the DG spoke about, to say these are the numbers that we're looking at, how are we going to make sure that we actually close that particular gap? Because I believe that as things stand, different individuals in those departments, they've got particular roles to play, and some of them you may find that they are very good administrators, some of them, Chair. Those are the things that I wanted to ask. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Good. 2 minutes, 13 seconds. Next, who's number two?
Chair, thank you. Let me start with the Eskom issue now that it is been raised already. I don't want to go to the issue of unbundling or restructuring. I do want to ask this question, though. Have we really bothered to investigate the deep-rooted bad business practices inside Eskom, so that we are able to provide informed answers? It's one thing to restructure or to unbundle. It's the other to do that, but still leave the deep-rooted problems unresolved in Eskom, including the 40 to 50 year evergreen practices, contracts that have been there, including checking, for instance, the price of coal at which government buys coal. It would be, I would have a difficulty with coal being sold to government at import parity prices. I mean, you sell your own resource at import parity prices. It's the same challenge that the steel industry had some time back until DTI intervened. I'm not saying that this is the situation at Eskom. I'm just saying, have we looked into all of those issues, so that when we resolve the issue of Eskom, whether we unbundle or restructure, but we have dealt with all of these underlying bad business practices? Because clearly we have changed the boards and the executives, but we don't seem to have solved the real problem. The second issue, Chair, the minister did talk about the illicit cigarette trade, and that we're going to focus that. I thought we should widen that to include all sorts of illicit trade. 2 or 3 years back, Sakau and that other food agriculture union raised an issue about illicit food trade, which undermines our own food production and food exports and so on. So if we talk about...
Honorable member,
cigarette
if you may round up.
Yes, Chair, thank you. But include in that the illicit outflows. We haven't heard much about our target on that, whether you're talking evasion or avoidance. Lastly, Chairperson, when the early retirement takes place, do we have a plan to plug in the holes by employing the unemployed graduates so that you don't have a situation where the frontline service suffers as a result of early retirements? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Let me start off with the first question. I think is the issue of, Minister, in your budget speech, you spoke about the underperformance of tax revenue. I want to know what impact is illicit financial flows contributing to this. Given the fact, I think, Minister, if you for one day come with me with 100 Superlink trailers, all with 40-foot containers, and I'll take you around just the Western Cape. I don't even have to take you to the other provinces yet. And I'll show you how you will fill every one of those containers with South African rands that are leaving the country every day, and that we in South Africa and the government is doing nothing about it. That's the first thing. The second thing is this. Added to that is the fact that my understanding is we need a holistic approach to the economic challenges that we face in the country. We're talking about job creation. The President spoke about local production, buying local products. Now the question I want to ask is, again, if you come with me with another 100 of those Superlinks, I will fill every one of them up with fake goods that are coming through the Mozambique border into South Africa. I will take you and show you, Minister, that over 80% of foreigners living in South Africa are employed, while 27% of South Africans are unemployed. And now if we don't take that, and also I want to ask you, does that not have an impact on the health in the country, on the crime in the country, on the housing in the country? All this illegal stuff that is coming into the country, the impact is in the crime particularly, and I think we know how the Minister of Police and his team are actually battling with that. But finally, I think I'll go on to the issue of privatization. Now, the question I wanted, Minister, I want you to give me this answer. There is talk of we wanting to unbundle or basically sell out state-owned entities because they don't make profits. Surely when somebody wants to buy, they want to buy something that's going to make them money. That's why somebody is going to invest and want to buy it. Now the question is, why is somebody wanting to buy something if they're not going to make money? It means they're going to make money. So why is it, if it is owned by the state, we can't equally make money? And in my understanding and investigation and some research I did all over the world, the only problem we have in South Africa is mismanagement of these state-owned entities. It is interference and influence of politicians and executive into these things. Otherwise, it can be run just as efficiently as the private industry. And I'll give you a good example. Malaysia has made a great success of it, amongst other countries. So the question is, why can't we do the same? So maybe you should tell us, Minister, what you're going to do to make this thing, rather than even consider releasing them or selling them, to be properly managed so that they can become a success. Because it is clear, privatization is to make money for investors. Its interest is not going to be the people on the ground. Let me stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member Imam. Thanks. Okay, we will then go to the fourth speaker. Okay.
So my first concern is that I feel that the language in the report doesn't quite match the numbers. So we talk about putting South Africa onto a new growth trajectory and as well as reducing long-term fiscal risks. But if you look at the numbers, the interventions seem to achieve the exact opposite. So in fact, debt will be stabilized at a higher level and growth numbers have been revised downwards. And I think, I don't want to go as far as saying it's dishonest, but I just think that there is some massaging of the numbers there in the language that is used in the report. And so firstly, that question, my first question is on the new growth trajectories, that obviously there's quite a big difference between catching South Africa or putting South Africa back to its potential growth path or to potential GDP and saying that we will actually, in fact, these measures will increase potential GDP. And I'd just like to have clarity about when we say that these interventions will place South Africa on a new growth trajectory, what do we mean here? That it's going to place us back, is going to get us to close the output gap and onto potential GDP? Or are you saying that we're actually going to increase potential GDP? Because if it's the latter, I think that's being overly optimistic about what these interventions can achieve. The second question is around inclusive growth, which is stated as a central economic policy objective. And the question is that obviously we can become more inclusive through equal misery. So I'd like to find out what are the measures that Treasury uses to ensure that in becoming more equal, we're becoming more equal through progress as opposed to decline. You can look at Gini coefficients and we can be becoming more equal, but becoming more equal in the ways that we'd like to become more equal, or as I say, is it because we're all actually sharing in misery and poverty that we're becoming more equal? The third one is a question around private investments and trade. So obviously we say that we want to boost and encourage private investments, and if we are serious about that task, one would think that we are then asking our major investors and saying, what do you need to have South Africa be the best business environment? What do you need in order to invest? And if we were doing that, we would know, for example, that the latest business survey by the EU Chamber of Commerce, it was in 2017, but I believe it still is their latest business survey in South Africa. Now, bearing in mind that the EU is it makes up for 80% of total FDI in South Africa, at least those the numbers as of 2017, also responsible for 500,000 jobs in South Africa. So the EU is a pretty large partner when we're talking about FDI and job creation. They list, for example, BE as one of their top 3 challenges of doing business in South Africa. So one would think that if the major trading and investment partner that South Africa has outlines a serious economic policy as an obstacle for them to invest and do business in South Africa, that there would be talks underway to rectify the situation. And I'd like to know, because actually in their report, they do ask for talks with authorities. I'd like to know what talks have happened and at what stage or status of those, what is the stage or status of those talks. Then very lastly on debt to GDP, sorry, I put that for myself. The time is up. I would just like to, very quickly add in that Treasury says that, sorry? No, but others, I was timing others and they went way over. But it's fine, can I leave, sorry?
Do it in the next round.
No, it's fine. I'll just leave that 4th question in the next round. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, that's me.
I won't time you.
I'm not going to be timed by my colleagues, and I'm over 60, so just relax, everyone. Minister, I'm very sorry that you're battling with your health and that we're now going to grill you like it's the Inquisition. So perhaps afterwards we can go and share a little rechtmaker and get ourselves back in line. Let's talk about Eskom. The amount of 23 billion rand that's being made available, whereabouts, and this perhaps is Dondo can answer, whereabouts exactly will we find that? What line item can we find that allocation? One question. Then the 230 billion that you mentioned over, I think DG mentions over 10 years. We're talking about a 3-year budget now. How can we be talking about 10 years? Without doubt, Eunice and I won't be here, but probably the whole cabinet, the cabinet will be different. How are we now talking about committing future governments to this kind of thing? And where will we find these figures in the budget documents? Then, with regard to the unbundling, It seems clear that no matter what opposition there may be to the unbundling, it's likely to go ahead. But the question then is, 17 billion rands worth of debt, how is that going to be unbundled? Who's going to take on that debt? Is it just going to be divided equally between the three units? Is it going to be held in the holding company? Is the sovereign going to take over? Then there's a mention in the review about PIC doing a debt equity. Are there discussions taking place with the PIC? What exactly is the progress for the PIC to now convert loans that they've given to Eskom into equity with absolutely zero value, negative value in actual fact? We really need to know that. In terms of just a quick one, in terms of the early retirement, there's some interest being shown there. When exactly will the window open for people to make these choices? Minister, this is one for you. One of the big issues facing us as a country is whether we can clutch onto and keep our last investment grade, the Moody's rating, and not be downgraded. Do you think that we go to be safe? Do you think you've done enough? I presume you're talking to Moody's. We really need a reassurance as a country. This is not a political question. This is a real issue that the whole country is sitting on the edge of their seats about. And Minister, sorry, just to go back. Okay, I will round up. Minister, can you reassure us that the assistance that's been given to Eskom is sufficient to ensure that Eskom will continue trading without any further blackouts as a result of financial issues, put aside the other engineering issues, but that there will be no reason for Eskom to come back to us in the next financial year for further funding?
Thank you. I'm a visitor to this committee from the Small Business Portfolio Committee. And I just wanted to ask a couple of questions around the paradox of the fact that small business development attracts a minuscule portion of this budget, less than 2%. And yet small businesses are expected to contribute 80% of the jobs in this country, according to the NDP. And the vast majority of the growth from this country's economy is expected to come from small business. So I think the first question I point to the Minister is the Ministry itself, and the Minister in particular, satisfied with the extent to which small business development is prioritized in this country? And certainly there have been calls from the Department of Small Business Development for extra funding, but it never seems to be that. You did refer to the fact that 600 billion odd was going into the incubation fund, but that's just a continuation of a fund that's been there for some time. The other question relates to the billion rand that has been allocated to the innovation fund, which is going to be spent by SEFA, the Small Enterprise Finance Agency. The problem with SEFA is that 60% of its direct loan book is impaired. So why would you be wanting to give another billion rand to an organization that can't manage its own loan book? The third question relates to the Section 12J of the Income Tax Act pertaining to venture capital companies. That's now been in operation for close on a decade. It has been reformed recently. And there are roughly 170 companies now registered as Section 12J companies. But does the Ministry, do you, Minister, believe that this is showing a bang for your buck? Is it stimulating entrepreneurship to the extent that is necessary to create startup companies that have high growth potential? And do you think that that is something that you as the Treasury need to be focusing more attention on, creating more incentives for startup businesses and high growth businesses, which actually are going to be the core of our economic trajectory in future. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, your 111 billion that you talked about in your speech going to higher education, I'm not clear whether that's new money or that's covering the actual costs of higher education, because if the latter, it's too little. If the former, and it's new money, then it really does raise the question raised by the World Bank in January in their report on South Africa, where they said that they believe that higher education funding as being undertaken by the government at the moment is unsustainable. It's a poor investment. It will amount to 172 billion rand a year by 2022, 2.5% of GDP. It is absolutely unsustainable, especially given that half the students do not complete their courses. So it's money down the drain. So I wanted to ask you whether you still have confidence in this higher education system that President Zuma introduced as his swan song, because the opinion does seem to be that it really isn't going to work as a long-term strategy. And even the Minister of Higher Education mentioned in our last committee that she was looking again at the Heyer Commission report, which recommended income contingent loans as the way to go for higher education, and that would be far more sustainable. So is the system sustainable, and are you considering, income contingent loans as in the Heyer Commission? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thanks very much, Minister, for your presentation. In your speech, you mentioned that the question should be asked about, isn't it time that the country asks the question is, do we need these enterprises on the state-owned enterprises? Now, I would like to know, Minister, whether this is a rhetorical question or whether you are actually asking this question. And if you are actually asking the question, to whom are you asking the question? And then what do you think will follow then from that to sort out the problem? And then on the macroeconomic picture, I mean, obviously, if you look at the macroeconomic indicators, revenue is sluggish, our expenditure is not sustainable, especially as the Minister mentioned, in terms of the state-owned enterprises and the public sector wage bill. Our debt is spiraling, it's costing a lot, it seems to be crowding out some basic service delivery, and our deficit is widening. What I would like to know from the Minister, in his opinion, is if you look at the macroeconomic picture, is this picture sustainable? And if it is not, what action actually are you going to do before we get to a situation where we crowd out the basic service delivery because we've got to pay a lot more for our debt as it increases, and also the difficulties we have then because you have a one-way bet on the rand then, because as your foreign debt increases, obviously we have to offload rands to get dollars to pay the debt. That causes another problem all on its own. So I would really like you to talk about the sustainability of the macroeconomic picture that we have at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In the budget review document, it mentions that GDP growth is expected to be 1.5% and then climb to 2.1%. I think South Africa has seen that these projections have been overstated pretty much every year whenever it happens. What informs this time that this is an accurate reflection and that these percentages will actually take place? The document also mentions a 27 billion rand reduction in compensation for employees. Has this been negotiated with trade unions? If it hasn't, that could obviously spell disaster for our economy's functioning. The 33.4 billion rand allocated to infrastructure, how will this affect wards in municipalities that have never had running water, never had basic sanitation? I know that local government does have numerous functions that they're meant to fulfill, but I think now is the time for national government to work hand in hand to ensure that we don't have any place in South Africa over time that has never had running water in history. The document mentions that government has strengthened policy certainty. I'd really like to find out where, because I don't follow in any case where policy certainty has been created. Why was the large business unit shut down? It says it was shut down, and now government is putting that back into place. We note that salaries of MPs and members of provincial legislatures are not going to be increased. Will this include cabinet ministers, and will it be extended to include mayors and premiers as well? We note that the child support grant is still below the poverty line. It's included only minimally. Is there any plans ever bring that in line or above the poverty line? And the budget is very thin on job creation. I didn't notice any new ideas in that regard. Perhaps if you can spell out if there are any. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you, Chair. The minister yesterday actually gave us a budget that has managed to that has managed to fund the president's SONA. But you know, I have been following what he has been saying, like South Africa is a small, open economy that is affected by events around the world. And I've been following the developments in the Brexit in the European Union. Are we going to get any advantage because there are businesses that are not happy to be in Britain after Brexit? And there's a lot of uncertainty all over around Europe. Are we putting ourselves in a situation that we can maybe benefit from most of those unhappy people in Europe because of the great uncertainty in the whole European Union? Because I think as far as uncertainty is concerned, we're better off. I've been following that story ever since UK triggered Article 50. And I've been following the debates in the European Union Parliament. It is very clear that we are in a better space than them. Yes, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chairperson. Minister, thanks for the briefing. I was looking at slide 11 of the briefing, the last bullet on slide 11, you know, where we spell out quickly, in 2018-19, the expenditure ceiling has been maintained and national and provincial compensation is likely to be lower than budgeted. So then, you know, based from that, my question leads to in terms of the measures for curbing the wage bill, especially through the cuts in the compensation budget, as has been spelled out very clearly. I think many would be then interested to know how then will government be implementing this fiscal sustainability measure without then, of course, impacting on the capacity of the state then to efficiently deliver basic service delivery to the people. I don't know, I just thought that this would be a great platform to discuss this issue, because government, of course, needs then to balance the needs for fiscal sustainability on the one side, and of course, in increasing the state's capacity to deliver services, and then of course meeting the goals of the NDP, which you also attributed to yesterday in your speech. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll then ask my colleague to also.
Thank you, Co-Chair Posa. Honourable Minister, and to the Acting Commissioner of SARS. Asked the same question during the MTBBS briefing. What progress is there on the rebuilding of SARS? Because if we don't collect enough revenue, you've got less revenue to divide, and it has a serious effect on the provincial budgets. And that's where the National Council of Provinces come in with the provincial mandate. Secondly, Honourable Minister, a proposal. And I'm speaking now for my province, Northern Cape. That's the biggest province geographically in South Africa, where officials travel a whole day from Springbok to Kimberley to attend provincial departments' meetings. That takes a day. Attend the meeting, maybe 3 hours. And the third day, they drive back to Springbok. Claim those kilometers that they traveled. You can look at the other provinces as well. What is the principle? To look at video conferencing, to look at Skype. And you can save money, maybe a little bit, but every little bit will help, step by step. And I propose, Honourable Co-Chairs, that the National Treasury, the Department of Monitoring and Valuation, and the Department of Public Service Administration look at this matter as a matter of urgency. Lastly, the Public Audit Amendment Bill is giving the Auditor General more power to zoom into irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure. That's more than 40 billion rand if you look at the last audit report. And that will help Parliament, but also the Auditor General, that we zoom into this and get the money back where it belongs. Thank you, Good Chair.
Okay. Honourable Member Eunice.
Yeah. Very quickly, sorry, I'll time myself, obviously. Just to say, Minister, Deputy Minister, we're excruciatingly aware of the parlous state of the economy and how severely challenged the state-owned companies are. And obviously the situation cannot persist. Now, insofar as Treasury and or the Cabinet are thinking about privatization, the question one wants to ask is, why can't we have other forms of public-private partnerships? For example, the committee has held the view, when we had SAA under our portfolio for a while, that even if it has to be 49% of SAA could be sold. Obviously, it's hard to sell when the conditions are what they are at the moment, but 51% should remain in state hands. So we can look at a number of private-public partnerships without having to privatize. Secondly, Minister, you might know or not know, but there was a shareholder management bill that Alec Irwin brought to the Public Enterprises Committee at the time that some of us were in it. That shareholder management bill has been simmering there. Why can't that be brought forward and finalized? We raised that when Lynn Brown was the minister. Thirdly, the president, the last president, in the first term that he served as president, had a presidential commission, I think, that looked into state-owned entities and made proposals. That too is already work done. Then on the issue of VAT returns, I noticed your remark. I'm interested. Are you saying that people are taking a chance on asking for VAT returns, or are you saying that the people who were turned down wrongly in terms of what they were entitled to in terms of VAT returns are now asking for it? If it's the latter, obviously, they have to be paid out because they can't be held responsible for the previous regime's decision not to pay them what they're entitled to. And for now, I think I'll just leave it there, except to say to members that I take it you are congratulating me and thanking me and applauding me. It's 2 minutes and 12 seconds. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Tandy, can you defeat that?
Okay. Tandy, yeah, we're on you. Thanks.
No, thank you very much, Chair. Chair, let me say this up front. I envy the minister to...
Excuse me, Tandy, I see a non-verbal communication here. What are you saying, sir?
No, leave this young man from the Free State Managers.
Okay, all right.
Your homeboy.
You know why? Because
Young
I
man.
see two hands coming up again. So we need to control this.
No, leave,
ne?
no, Chair, leave
We
God's.
still need to give enough chance to
Leave God's.
National
Leave-
Treasury to give
no,
us
leave God's.
responses. Okay,
You will not
Thandi?
understand him. Yeah, Chair, I'm saying I envy the minister to be the minister in the current conjuncture. You know, a few days ago, I made it my business to look at the American debt to GDP. The figures were amazing. It was 22.7 trillion just for the federal debt to GDP without inclusion of the entire United States. It went up to 25.86 trillion if you include provincials and other states. And I know some people will say I juxtapose a big economy to a small economy in terms of debt to GDP, but I was looking at the trends. And having listened to other people when they juxtapose our microeconomic policy, some strongly believe, and I thought the Red Overalls was going to re-articulate that view, because it's a view that has been held very closely by Floyd, that basically if your debt is higher, as long as investment is in infrastructure development, you can have a bigger risk appetite as long as it's managed properly. And some will not see the stabilization of debt as it moves to the outer years. I think it's a debate that at some point, at a macroeconomic policy level, we'll have to discuss. Secondly, in the speech yesterday, you mentioned that the ETI programs is going to increase. Interestingly, you said that immediately after the Budget Office of Parliament raised a specific concern on ETI. They said we lack a management tool as government to measure the successes of the ETI program. Perhaps at some point, DG, we will have to provide a success story about how the incentive program has made an impact in the economy. I believe in it. In my previous life, I was in trade and I did international trade, and part of investor luring was to show them the incentives, the incentive program. In the automobile sector, for instance, the incentive program worked very well to lure investors. We had Marco Polo investing in South Africa on the basis of that. Now we're producing components on our own that we are able to export in the general African market due to the impact of the ETI program. I don't want to belabor the point, but maybe the time has come to use measurements to deal with that. Also, a very interesting equation has been presented to us about the level of the South African tax buoyance. 283 billion shortfall in the
Honorable
economy.
Tobias, you have to round up.
Hey, Chair, I don't know
Yes,
what
we have
am I
time
going to do.
constraints.
I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I've got quite a few issues and I don't know. Yeah, Chair. Chair, can I
Let's
stop
agree
and
that
then
you'll
when
be
there
given
is free
another
time?
chance,
Yeah,
ne,
Chair,
to
let me
raise the
stop
your
here when
questions.
there's.
Please, Thandi.
Yeah, no, I'm going to stop here, and I hope, by lack of Jesus and so on, I'll get 5 minutes later on.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I just want to ask a few questions as well. Honorable Minister, in the budget, there's 481 million that was allocated to small development agency for incubator expansion. What is not clear to me is whether this is an MTF allocation or just for 2019/20. But also nothing is being said about the township economy. Could it be that it's included in the 481 million? Or maybe, I'm sure you'll have an explanation so that we understand, because this did come up strongly from the speech from SONA, but also as one other area that would assist in boosting the economy. Of course, on the configuration of the SOEs, so far I know that there's a very big story about your Eskom, but we're not hearing about the other SOEs. And actually, this has always been reported to us, and we even asked for a plan, which we did not get on the configuration of the SOEs. It has always been there. So I would like to know if there's any progress this time around, because we cannot just talk about it and not act on it. Of course, the SAA private equity partner intervention, is there any progress there or not, and what are the issues? Now, there's an urgent announcement to be made by my honorable.
Just to explain, we've been told by the Whippery downstairs that we'll all be required to go down to vote and to come back again. I think it's to do with the, maybe you know, Mr. Lees, I think it's to do with the dissolution of Parliament resolution. And we have to get that adopted today. Otherwise, the President can't announce or promulgate the date of the election on Tuesday. So we just go down quickly once the bells start ringing and come back swiftly. Once we vote, within 5 minutes, we reconvene. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall we then go and vote and come back?
No, when the bells ring.
No, when the bells ring.
Yeah, when the bells ring. Sorry.
Oh,
When the bells ring, we have 5 minutes. Colleagues, comrades.
But remember,
No.
we start on the-
No. When the bells ring, we have a full 5 minutes to go down. We'll make it. That's what we agreed.
Is it safe?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, then I'm told that maybe we should, yes, respond in that manner. Shall we, in the meantime, whilst waiting for the bells to ring, get some responses from National Treasury? Over to you, Honorable Minister.
I understand from the Deputy Minister that he's going to be taking the bulk of the question. There you go.
Honourable members, the meeting is suspended until our colleagues return from the National Assembly.
Honorable members, shall we reconvene? We're waiting for members to settle down so that we can proceed with the meeting. Well, thank you very much for your understanding. We are back. I would like to again request the Minister to provide responses to the questions that were asked, the Minister and his team. Over to you, Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, but I noticed that the people who asked some of the questions are not here, so I don't know. But I hope they won't come and ask the same questions. The Deputy Minister was supposed to answer some of the questions, but he's not here. Let me start with the well, the tax collection issue is going to address. The growth trajectory issue. Really, under normal circumstances, you'll ask yourself the question, where is this growth going to come from? Is it going to come from tourism? Is it going to come from both agricultural, manufacturing, exports, including even mining? So where is this growth going to come from? So the Treasury economists made some calculations which say if we get the tourism issue sorted out, like we've discussed before, that could add X percentage points to growth. I think I went through that in the medium-term budget statement, if you recall. If we sort out the industrial parks, that could contribute so much. Sort out agriculture, so much. If you bear in mind, for example, in agriculture, that last year agriculture contributed some $11 billion of exports. So that's clearly an area that we must come back and focus on. All kinds of regulatory bottlenecks and so on. So a multi-pronged approach, as we indicated in the medium-term budget statement, in terms of those package of measures that will help the growth process. Infrastructure investment, very key to the growth process. That's why we are allocating, we're making an allocation for the infrastructure investment fund, and we want to try and learn from wastage by locating capacity and capability in the DBSA, but bringing together the Presidential Infrastructure Commission work and together with any funding that we are going to source from the New Development Bank. So a number of areas will contribute to the growth trajectory. Civil service numbers, it is clear that without negotiating the detail with the public service workers, we might not be able to go anywhere. But I understand that the willingness is there amongst a significant number of them to go on pension. Of course, in things like this, one has to tread carefully that you don't end up losing some of the more efficient and good civil servants. Because normally the good ones tend to leave and the bad ones tend to stay. I'm not making any comment about Parliament at all. I'm just saying that that's the experience globally. That's why I'm not a member of Parliament now. So, under normal circumstances, what you do is the DGs should know their people. So they should be able to say, whenever you can't go, please stay. But Eunice should go because it's troublesome. And so on. So that's how you retain some of the good people. I went through this exercise in the probably given your behavior this morning, maybe I went through the same exercise in the Department of Labor and also in the South African Reserve Bank, and we were able to reduce numbers quite significantly, but retain the people that we wanted to stay. So one has to be very careful about how you go about it. I'm not going into more details about this. The minister has probably issued the circular already by now, so some of the detail will be in the circular that she's going to issue. The small business support. I think that we are probably beginning to create too many institutions. And this might be a problem. So I've begun to ask myself the question whether it was such a wise thing to have allowed the Small Business Development Corporation to die. It was probably not a wise thing. And so a little bit more thinking is required on how to have a clearly targeted, better managed funding model for small business. But we can't wait until we create the most appropriate structures. That's why the allocation to the small business, was it enterprise? What is it?
The department.
No, the institution.
CFA, Small Business Enterprise Funding.
Small Business Enterprise Funding.
Small Enterprise Finance
Small
Agency.
enterprise, yes. So I think that's why the allocation to that. I hope we're able to get some of the money back. And I think we talk quite a lot about small businesses, you're right. But when it comes to the actual directed, targeted funding, we tend to be a bit weak there. So, but I mean, we'll bear your point in mind as we implement these programs. The salary freezes, yes, they do affect cabinet ministers, yes. And and are beginning to complain because they've not had an adjustment, I think, for a number of years now. And of course, there's a danger in these salary freezes because you're creating a structural weakness. When 1 year to come and make good the gap, you might find that the jump might be a bit high and will attract people. Maybe do it halfway through the next parliament. And then I think anybody in the system who earns 1.5 and above will experience that wage freeze. So I've written to all the ministers to say to them that they must carry the same message to the entities which report to them. For example, CSIR or whatever. And I hope they've gone ahead to do. Partly symbolic that we're in difficult situations, so let's tighten our belts. So that society out there can see that we're doing something, even though they still think that ministers are overpaid, so on. Well, coming back from the private sector, I was shocked to find how little ministers get paid. I was really shocked. Well, the MPs, I was looking at myself, and when I noticed that the Minister of Finance also gets paid the same, when with the Minister of Sports, I was shocked. I said, who wouldn't do such a thing in the private sector? Okay. SAA privatization. Do you want it? I can give it to you for R1. I can give it to you for R1. The reason why it's so difficult to privatize SAA is structural. Nobody wants to buy it. It has got so much debt. It's not functioning optimally. From what the briefing I have from the Department of Public Enterprises is that it really doesn't have many assets, actually. I think the Minister of Public Enterprises is trying his best to working with the Eskom Board of Directors and executive to see if they can find an equity partner, but it's very difficult to find an equity partner. I have a solution for SAA, but I've been told not to speak about it anymore, but I have a solution for SAA. You see, for example, if SAA has about just close on 3% shareholding in Airlink, Airlink is profitable. It's making money. I'm sure you've seen at the airport they're beginning to buy larger aircraft. And they have some regional routes, Swaziland, Gaborone, Livingston, and so on. That poses an interesting conceptual challenge, which probably gives you a solution in the process to SAA. I can't say much than this, but it gives you something to think about. And for example, I don't think it makes sense to have South African Express side by side with Airlink, with Express being 100% SAA and Airlink 3% SAA. You all use the same booking system for your flight. It's really, truly speaking, let's wake up a bit, really. So I leave that there. The Eskom issue. I must apologize if the words that we use might be confusing. But actually it means the same thing. And I think probably the best way is the way in which we put it yesterday, that we're talking about dividing Eskom into three parts: generation, transmission, and distribution. Now it's correct in English to say you've reconfigured the entity. It's a reconfiguration. Some will say it was one thing, we've unbundled it. But I think the president doesn't like the word unbundle, so having three divisions seems to be a better way. But the generation division will compete with other power generators, whether they are hydro, whether they are renewable energy, whether they are other large generators of power. I think we should be open to that. And I like the way the president puts it. He says that this will avoid us having our eggs in one basket. So if an Eskom generator fails there, why should we all suffer because it's Eskom? What about if we had other competitors? They will continue producing, and if they fail one day, the Eskom generators will be able to continue supply. So you have competition in that market. But I think the point that he has been strong about is the transmission, that will remain as a national grid. But who knows over time what's going to happen. But for now, he has been very strict about that. And on the distribution side, we know what happens. I mean, these municipalities, Eskom that does it directly. You might find other technologies that might come in. So I think that's what is being talked about. But once that is achieved, we'll have a better sense of the actual cost structure. Where is the bigger problem in the system? And better management. At the moment, Eskom as well is just too big to manage, I think. So that's where we are, but but we are proceeding from the point that we're not going to wait for the restructuring to be done. Eskom needs assistance now. That's why we're providing the 23 billion over the per annum over the next 3 years. We're sure about, but that will continue for about 10 years, which will come to around 230 billion or something like that. But for now, I think we wrote in the book 69 billion, which is 3-year period. But as I said, and I emphasize it again here, wherever the Treasury provides funding from now onwards, we are going to install our people there as well, to be our eyes and ears there. And these things work, by the way. Anybody in the private sector who has been subjected to this thing would tell you this thing works. I was on the board of PPC when the banks lost patience with us. And for all intents and purposes, they took the keys of the company. What did they do? They installed the chief restructuring officer. It doesn't mean lack of confidence in the board of directors. The board of directors continues with his function, his supervisory role, but this is operational. Working very closely with the chief executive and the chief operations officer. Yes, there can be conflicts between the chief restructuring officer and the CEO, but they are adults, they will have to sort themselves out. There was something about the township economy. Deputy Minister will answer because he was a mayor, he understands that very well. The rest, Brexit. The immediate benefit for us from Brexit is not about companies which were located in England coming to locate in South Africa, but it's on the trade side. So suddenly, I think those of you who are in the trade and industry portfolio should know this. Suddenly, we'll find actually some opportunities for some of our products, particularly wine, directly into the English market. So we'll no longer have some of the restrictions in competing with French wine in the rest of Europe, but we can send wine directly to the British. So there'll be some trade benefits. I personally don't like Brexit. I think they're making a big mistake, but there's some marginal benefits we're going to get there. Let me leave it there, and my colleagues will take on the others. Maybe DM, you want to start with the township economy? Thank you very much.
I'm so used to the minister answering all these questions. So as a result, for God to be an aloe in readiness to respond. On the issue of township economy, this is an intervention, as you know, to check stimulation of the economy in a wider sense, ensure that these activities take place where the historically disadvantaged people are. In the stimulus package, this was one of the areas that were intended to be stimulated. But my trick is that I would request the officials to explain when I wanted to know why we don't have it exactly here. It appeared that in the MTF, at a particular point in time, the exact figure might come in there. But the other way the money will find where is when you piggyback on the existing what you call program of about that goes to small business enterprise for about 1 billion. But I think the managers will explain that one better when they actually respond. I don't have to explain its benefits. Its benefit, I know. To go and build the infrastructure in the township, for instance, to ride on the minister's words. If you go to Ekurhuleni, for instance, you go to Tembisa, to Togoza, there's something called fabrication laboratory, where kids are kept busy innovating. Boston World Foundation is led worldwide. I think Ekurhuleni is one of the few that affiliates to that. A lot of ideas do come out of that in the township. Of course, there are innovation hubs, incubation hubs. If you go to Isando, where up-and-coming business are given opportunities to actually build their ideas and be given infrastructure that is available, both from the point of skill and access to IT. It applies not only to that, it also applies to construction and so on. But however, in terms of the exact intervention with regard to finance, I think it's safer to allow the management to articulate those figures. I hope that was the only one you wanted me to comment on.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Deputy Minister. As I said at the beginning, we've got Mampo who's going to touch on all areas that are related to funding, specific funding, and Duncan will talk about the growth stuff. Ian will talk about the fiscal stuff, the framework, and why 23 billion. And then we've got Chris and, to an extent, Mark Keenan from SARS will then talk about tax-related matters. There were a number of questions around tax. And then later, Chair, we'll just clean. Maybe let's start with Ian. Thanks. Yes, that's Mampo.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So there have been a lot of questions. Let me try and clarify how the Eskom numbers appear in the book. So the fundamental is this: there's a lot of uncertainty about the long-term outlook for Eskom. Tremendous uncertainty. There are a lot of people working on this, looking at it, thinking about the numbers. But the fact of the matter is, it all depends on what you think the long-run tariff increases are going to be, what kind of growth there's going to be, what is the electricity demand going to be, and how electricity intensive will growth be, what will the structure of the company be like over the next 5 to 10 years. And in a sense, a lot of that work still has to be done. But we had to make a decision in putting together the fiscal framework about what should be said about Eskom. You know, the one extreme is to say nothing and say that work is still underway. They have space under their guarantee. Once that guarantee has been used up, we will present some additional figures. We felt that that would not be credible because we know that Eskom is a major financial risk. It's a major risk to growth and to the public finances, and well, the severity of the situation, I'm sure, we've seen with load shedding and other issues coming through in the past few weeks. So on those decisions, we decided we must say something explicit about Eskom, especially around the financing. That's why we've gone with putting these figures into the fiscal framework. The next discussion is, well, how do you do it? What number do you put in? Having spoken to the presidential task team and to a wide range of other interested parties that have been looking at Eskom's numbers for a while, our conclusion is that Eskom needs balance sheet support of around 150 billion rand. If you amortize that over 10 years, you get 23 billion rand per annum, and that's the number that we've penciled into the framework. So it's not exact, but we do know for a fact that Eskom has got severe liquidity pressures coming up over the coming year. We know that we can't allow Eskom to default, and it's clear that they are going to need some support in order to pay off their debt service costs and do capital repayments, and that is what this funding is set aside for. So effectively, it's 150 billion of balance sheet support spread out over a decade. Now, the question is, can we commit to that? I think that was one of the questions put forward. Can we commit to that? Well, the way we're thinking about it is a lot has to be worked out, both on the financing and the operational reform side. But we know that they are going to require support over the next couple of years, and we've penciled that in. Beyond that, it's going to depend on all of the factors that I've just mentioned, but we felt the prudent thing is to put in some numbers over the next decade, and it's all going to depend on exactly how this reorganization process plays out. You know, the other thing is that in discussions with ratings agencies, one of the key elements that was put to us is that whatever we do, we need to be transparent about it. We also think that this is the most transparent way that we can signal our support to Eskom. How the money will exactly flow is going to also depend on the structure, the new company, and the way in which the divisions are put together. The exact asset and liability mix of each is still to be determined, but of course it's not a situation in which the PICs would be doing a debt-to-equity swap for assets that aren't generating a return. Again, this is all that has to be worked out. These discussions are underway, but ultimately we're saying that we have to confront this challenge, and we've put some figures into the budget. Over time, these are going to change as we become, as the plan around it becomes clearer. And it is clear that Eskom needs support right now in order to keep the lights on and continue with its current work.
Thank you. There was a question, and Mark will come in on illicit cigarette trading and the impact thereof and outflows. And you can come to that, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe just to touch on a few things, because there's been a few questions, I could just deal with it. But in terms of the illicit trade, I would like to just refer the members. There's two notes, one in Annexure C which deals with specifically in terms of the customs space where advance payments are paid for goods to come into the country in the future. It's on page 137 of the budget review. And it deals with an amendment that we're going to be considering with regards to customs and excise for us to share information with the banks to enable us to actually reconcile the advance payments with the money that is coming, going out, with the goods coming in. Because we do believe, from the information that we're receiving from the banks, that this is one of the areas that is being utilized for illicit financial flows. People place an order and the goods never arrive. And if we can reconcile that, we do believe that we can address that. There's also an amendment which Chris could maybe just touch on from a policy point of view in Chapter 4. But Chair and Minister, if it's all right, I'll respond to the other SARS matters because there's a number of questions pertaining to SARS. There was a question with regards to the large business centre that was shut down and put back together. I think that is dealt with extensively by Judge Nugent in his commission, and the Minister did allude to the fact that that is being established formally from 1 April. The illicit economy unit, which deals with illicit financial flows, including textiles and any other good, whether where it comes in illicitly, has been re-established. We've got over 50 people that are operating in that unit. While I will not discuss taxpayer affairs, you are aware of what was in the media this week. That will become the norm. We cannot sit with a debt book of around 150 billion where people just actually ignore us, for want of a better word, and simply don't pay. So that will become the norm. We intend to take action to collect. What have we done to strengthen our organization? Since MTBPS, I think a big focus then was the issue of refunds. Refunds peaked at in excess of 40 billion rand in terms of VAT. I'll just focus on that because there was a lot of discussion. As of yesterday, that reduced to 23.7 billion on our VAT credit book. With only 8 billion, that is work that we can actually do. So really, we're on top of this now. We are refunding, if you read in the budget review, around 22 point something billion a month. We really have got on top of this, and we intend to continue to ensure that we are on top of that. Yes, there's other things we are doing in various areas, including looking to get new staff in, and specifically with skills. Transfer pricing is one of the areas that we have to get skills in. We haven't managed or succeeded as well as we would like at this stage, but we are committed to do that. We do believe we're moving forward, which is the important thing. We're not moving backwards. Yes, revenue has not followed, which the Minister keeps reminding me that we need to get. We have to collect the revenues. But while we've got a debt book of around 150 billion, we've got a job to do, and we're going to do it.
I mentioned earlier that there's also the possibility, honorable members, that because people have seen that they're now getting the VAT refund, even those who were discouraged before now are starting to apply because they can see this thing is happening. It's not a bad thing on its own. It's good because it means that money is flowing back as well into people's pockets, into the economy, so that's positive. And it's good because it shows, again, a returning confidence into the SARS system, which is very good for tax collection. Thank you.
Appeal that you come short and to the point. We're running out of time. Yeah, we were given up till 3 o'clock, to finish our business. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll be short. There were a few questions about the growth forecast and potential GDP and so on. So just to speak to those, and then on the policy certainty question and the small business financing. The member is correct. Our forecast has been revised downwards in the budget this year relative to the MTBPS, but also in the last few years. And I think the important point to make there is that so has everyone else's. So there's a range of institutions like ourselves, banks, international multilateral agencies, and so on, university academics, they all produce forecasts, and all of them have had to revise their forecast down consistently over the last few years. What's important to note about the Treasury forecast is that independent research has looked at our forecasts relative to those of other institutions and has found that over the last few years, our performance has been better than most of those other institutions. And the way they assess better is that we've had to revise our forecast down less than most of those other institutions. And the reasons forecasts get revised down is because forecasts are based on assumptions, and those assumptions change. So just to give an example to the members, we've had to revise our household consumption assumption down relative to the MTBPS. The reason we've had to do that is because what we expected around how wages were going to grow came out lower than what everyone expected. And because wage growth is lower and because employment growth is lower, that means households have less money to spend, and so we have to revise our household consumption number down. Other assumptions can go up. Our commodity price assumption, for example, has gone up. Our oil price since October has come down. In October, we weren't quite sure what was going to happen with Eskom. Now we know we have Eskom built into the fiscal framework, and because of what's happened to Eskom, we've had to change our investment assumption, because providing fiscal support to Eskom crowds out private investment, so we had to change that assumption. And we had to change our sovereign risk premium assumption. And I think at some point, I think we've said this before, it might be useful for us to just take the members through the forecast process and how it works. What we have introduced in the budget this year, just to speak to the issue around potential GDP, we have introduced a range of 4 scenarios around our forecast. So we have a baseline forecast. We've reported on this before, but this year we put it up front in Chapter 2. We have our baseline forecast, which we need for the fiscal framework and which Chris needs for the tax framework. But we have 4 scenarios around that. And scenario A speaks to the issue of how do you raise potential GDP growth, and I think the minister spoke to that as well, and what that means for the forecast potentially on the upside. But we also have a downside scenario, and the downside scenario links to a fiscal crisis and what that would mean for growth, for example. And I think it's very important for us to understand that, yes, we have a baseline forecast, but there are a range of scenarios around that forecast. Just very briefly on some of the other issues. Where are the areas where we strengthen policy certainty? The feedback we've received from the private sector in particular has been that where they've appreciated the policy certainty coming through has been around mining and energy policy in particular. Energy policy in the form of the finalization of the renewable energy bid windows 4 and 4.5, and that's obviously unlocked private investment, which is built into our forecast. And then on the mining policy side, we've had a range of developments, and we could see the impact that that's had on mining investment commitments at the investment conference. Then just finally, very briefly on the small business financing, and Mampo will talk to this as well. There was a question around, shouldn't we be creating support for startups and entrepreneurship through this process? The key difference with the small business financing that's been announced at 1 billion a year that will start flowing this year is that it is a joint fund between the Department of Science and Technology and small business, so it has an innovation component as well, and it particularly will target startups and early businesses in the early phase of their business cycle. And what's critical in terms of the relationship with CIFA's impairment book, yes, CIFA does have a big impairment book, but the part of CIFA's impairment book that performs very well is their wholesale financing part of the book, which is where they use intermediaries to disperse the funding on their behalf and to do the credit checking and so on. And the model that is envisaged for this funding is along similar lines. So it will have an innovation component, it will have a startup component, and the model of disbursement will be one that relies on a wholesale funding model, which is where the impairments have been much lower than the rest of their book.
Chairperson, regarding...
Dr. Modiso, you left with, I think, almost 2 minutes. I hear you, but we have time constraints. Yeah, but it's all right. I know she can do it within 2 minutes. Over to you.
The 481, that is over the MTF in terms of the Small Business Enterprise Development Agency. The question on higher education, so the first thing is that the 105 million that is in the book, that is not to fund the announcement made by the president, but it's actually to fund the student accommodation in the different TVET colleges. So it's not part of that, but we have been working with Sizwe Ngasana and other trust team members to figure out the sustainability of the higher education. Basically what it will depend on would be how fast we roll it out, who gets included. And if you work around those mechanics, then the ministers will have to decide on which model is sustainable. Do you continue with grant funding? Do you introduce loans? But that work continues, because remember, we were just given, or the policy was announced, we had to implement it, but we have been working with the department and the private sector quite a lot in terms of trying to come up with a sustainable model. I'm not saying that, I'm saying you have policy, you have to implement it, then you work around the modalities of which part of it can become a loan or a grant funding, and what is the mix. Remember that the president only announced up to 350,000, but you still have to decide or figure out how you help the missing middle. We still have to work on that. So that's the work I'm talking about.
Okay, Honorable Minister, honorable members, I think we've exhausted, the questioning time. But then for all those who still have got questions, may I please request you to write them down and then submit them to the Secretariat, who will then redirect that to the department, and the department will respond that in writing. And all the responses will be circulated to members. Thank you very much. I would like to hand over to Honorable
I'm going to be very brief, just to alert the Minister,
Please
because,
close,
there's nothing to summarize, just to alert you, Minister. This committee, Finance, we work with 4 other committees. We're obsessed with illicit financial flows. We feel that far, far more needs to be done, and far, far quicker. It's not just the responsibility of SARS and Treasury. It's a whole lot of departments. We wrote to your predecessors to say, we suggest, though we can't prescribe, that it's consideration by the presidency of an interministerial committee. For the very reasons you spoke this morning about the severe crisis we're in, we need every penny that is due to SARS to get there. And the figures vary from 50 billion to much lower. Even if it's 10 cents, let's get it back. And we really wish you well on this illicit financial flows. Thank you. There's nothing for me to add. We're out of time. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.
Yebo.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Well
that's
done.
fine.
Watch yourself tonight on the news.
No worries.
Yebo.
Wow.